It is Friday, July 12th, 2024, and a number of things are going on in the world. So we'll check out those and see what folks have to say about them. And all along those lines, Israeli forces are pulling back after a Gaza City offensive. And of course, they're saying that they're leaving dozens of bodies. And of course, I guess there are some rescue missions going on as well. So it looks like one of the quotes is that a Gazan says is, "We have nothing," and Ghazians returned to Shavia after IDF wrapped up a 2 week raid. And so that is something that's going on, and 65 bodies have been pulled from the rubble after the Israeli operations in Gaza City and all along those lines. So definitely, it looks like a freed Israeli hostage recalls the joy of rescue and depression in captivity. So definitely, that is something else that is going on. And there's even this one of them was even detailing some of the psychological abuse that was going on during the 8 months of captivity. One of the things that was quoted was, "Tomorrow I kill you," as the rescued hostage detailed psychological abuse that they had during the time that they were there. And the world's population is projected to peak at 10.3 billion in the 2080s, according to the UN. So that's where it looks like we're heading in terms of population. So definitely that's something that folks will be looking at. So they're saying that we could have 10.3 billion people that'll be here and all along those lines. And when I say here, I mean the planet Earth and all along those lines. So it'll be very interesting to see how that goes. And more than 60 are missing as a Nepal landslide sweeps buses into the river. So that is something else that folks are talking about in the news. 3 people have survived after 2 buses on the Nepal highway fell into a swollen river, with at least 60 reported missing. So that's something else that folks are paying attention to. And a 6.6 earthquake off of Vancouver Island triggered alerts in Western Washington. So that's something else that folks are listening to and seeing what's going on. The North Pacific was rattled by a series of earthquakes, the largest measures at 6.4 magnitude. And so that's something that folks are paying attention to as well. So, like I said, there's a number of things that are going on in that space and along those lines. So we've got that going on, and we'll see what else happens in that way. So definitely a lot of things are taking place in that way. And like I said, we'll see how things go in other things. Um, it looks like an Australian Army private, and I do say that I've got Shaquille here, and her husband have been accused of spying for the Russians. So definitely that's something else that is in the news. So a Russian-born Army private planned to spy for Moscow, according to news coming out of Australia. So that's something else that folks might be interested in, and we can talk about as well. And definitely, we've got a number of things going on with the world news. And of course, the NATO conference just ended, and all along those lines. So we've got a number of things happening in that space, and we'll see how this all goes and what folks have to say about a number of these things. Um, Another news that came out of Russia is apparently Russia plotted to kill the CEO of a major German weapons manufacturer deemed a thorn in Moscow's side. So definitely that's something else that the people are paying attention to as well. Um, and apparently, nervous world leaders were greeting the Biden at NATO, and even some European leaders were defending Biden's NATO summit gaffes. And the media, apparently, in some sources, is saying that he's done because he definitely mistaked Zelensky for Putin in one of those gaffes, and they also mislabeled Kamala Harris and all along those lines. So definitely be interested to see what our panel has to say about that as well. And Japan says its military is often flouted rules on handling secrets. So Japan naval chief is to step down after 200 officers were punished for misconduct. So that's something else that we're seeing in the news as well. And NATO's pledge to Ukraine falls short for a counteroffensive this year, but Biden did announce a new 225 million military aid package for Ukraine. So it looks like what some folks are saying, including those at Politico, is that Ukraine wins big, NATO wins smaller, and everyone was sweating because it was definitely hot in D.C. and all along those lines. So definitely be interesting to see what goes on in that space. And definitely Hurricane Beryl finally dissipates. So the National Hurricane Center has been looking at that, and apparently Beryl made some history, and it had a 6,000-mile path of destruction all the way from Africa to Vermont. So it definitely had a long path and all in that space, and we'll see what else brews up in that area as well. So definitely be interested to see what goes on in that way. And in the UK, thousands of prisoners are to be released early to avoid the total breakdown of law and order. So plans are to tackle prison overcrowding in that area. So they're planning to release some of the prisoners in that area. And UK's new Justice Secretary is set to outline emergency measures to relieve prison overcrowding. And definitely this will be interesting to see what goes on in that way. And the Baltics, Nordics, and Poland are to boycott the Hungarian presidency. So Viktor Orban has solidified his credentials as the EU's one of the EU's primary villains. So Hungary's Orban faces a backlash over his rogue peace mission meetings with Western adversaries. So apparently some of the Western folks are not all that pleased with what he was doing as well. And the UN has demanded that Russia immediately return Europe's biggest nuclear plant to in Ukraine. So definitely that's something going on. And India is refusing to back the UN resolution demanding an end to the Russia-Ukraine offensive. So definitely that'll be interesting to see what folks have to say about that. And a small fire in the tower and spire of medieval cathedral in French city of Rome is under control. So that's good to know, and we're glad to see that that's under control as well. So definitely there's a number of things going on in the world. We'll see some of the things going on in the U.S., and then I'll bring in my esteemed panel, see what they've got to say about Biden's speech and a number of other things as well, including that population projection and all along those lines. But definitely these folks are still talking about those accidental gaffes, including Biden mistakenly introducing Zelensky as President Putin and all along those lines. So then he tried to catch himself, according to some folks, and they tried to joke about it, but we'll see whether folks are saying that he is totally done and that it's time for him to move on. But we'll see what folks have to say about that. A helicopter with 3 people on board crashed off the Kauai Na Pali coast in Hawaii. So 1 is dead and 2 missing after the helicopter crashed into the ocean in Hawaii. And of course, the U.S. heat wave is stretched into another day and starts to move east, even though we're getting a little bit of a break. I think it's supposed to be in the 70s or high 70s or maybe low 80s today. And that's what it was yesterday. But I do know those hundreds are coming back. I think part of the reason it's supposed to be a little bit of a break is because we're expecting some rain here in Durham, North Carolina as well. So it'll be interesting to see what's going on there. And if you want to hear some good news, apparently a trucker found an abandoned 1-year-old boy alive along a highway a day after his sibling had then I think found killed and all along those lines. But the trucker that found him even gave some credit to the Most High, because he said, I believe it was God that had me there at the right place at the right time, as he recounted rescuing the baby near I-10. And the paternal grandmother of the 4-year-old found dead in Vinton speaks out, and the mother, who has been arrested after the 4-year-old son was found dead, and the infant was found crawling in a ditch. So it's very good that truck driver had his eyes alert and found that young infant and all along those lines. Houston area residents are struggling without power and water as excruciating heat continues in that area, and CenterPoint, which I believe is their major power distributor, is expecting 80% of the impacted customers to have power restored by Sunday. So they've actually been without power for a number of days. As a matter of fact, frustration mounts as the Texas power crews, as 1 million are still in the dark after Beryl had hit that particular part of the world as well. So definitely some interesting news to go on. And by the way, as far as Biden, he is to campaign in swing state Michigan after the high stakes NATO press conference. And looks like Biden sought a 2020 campaign boost at this Michigan school that he's going to, and now he's returning with a new ask. So definitely, it'll be interesting to see how the fine folks there in Michigan react to his visit and all along those lines, and what happens in that space. So definitely, we're still having folks that are calling for him to drop out of the race, including one of the top House Democrats and others that are going on and asking for that as well. And of course, we do know that the Milwaukee, and that's a city I know somewhat since I did go to school way back when there in the early 80s, but they're getting ready for Trump's visit because Republicans are gathering in Milwaukee to dominate Donald Trump once again. So we'll see how that goes and what happens in that. And if you're wondering about court cases, juries to begin deliberations Friday in the bribery trial of New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez. So definitely we'll see what goes on in that and what the results are of that particular trial as well. So definitely that is a trial that folks have been paying attention to. And of course, we did have police investigating a homicide in North Austin, Texas, as victims in that deadly North Austin shooting have been identified as surveillance footage of the suspect has been released. And the man was a man was found dead after the Northeast Austin homicide on Friday morning, but no arrest as of yet. So definitely we'll see what goes on in that way. And Politico was saying that a man plotted an electrical substation attack to advance the white supremacist views, according to what a prosecutor has said in that particular case as well. So, like I said, we'll see what goes on in there. And one of the kingmakers has said he's all in for President Biden, that being Representative James Clyburn of South Carolina. So Jim Clyburn is riding with Biden amid the growing calls to drop out, but would endorse a Harris candidacy if the Democrats should switch candidates and all along those lines. But right now he's saying he's all in with the Biden campaign and all along those lines. So like I said, I've got Dr. Dan Worthington, I've got Shaquille with me, and I've got Sasha Starr, and of course I had Kim. He popped in earlier. So if she gets on camera and she's got things to say as well. So that's who we've got with us on this particular Friday. We'll see if anybody else pops in. I do know some folks that told me they had other commitments, including Rick Rosner, but I do expect to see him on Monday and all along those lines. So it'll be quite interesting to see what folks have to say about a number of these news stories and all along those lines. So it was very good to see. I guess the first thing that I'll bring up is there was that rescue young baby that was found, and that's just good that the truck driver was keeping his eyes open and actually saw the young lad, even though there was some other sadder news in teen news or news with kids. But apparently, a family of a teen who died after the one chip challenge is suing that particular snack company. Definitely looks like $10 for his life is what the lawsuit filed in Rochester case is talking about. I believe that's Rochester, Massachusetts. So the family is suing both Hershey and Walgreens after the teen dies from a viral chip challenge. So I guess those challenges are still out there. And I know there have been a number of those challenges. I was not that familiar with this particular challenge. It looks like it's from a brand called Pakwai or something like that, but it looks like the family filed a lawsuit in the case of the teen who died after eating a spicy chip. So apparently these chips are somewhat spicy, and I don't know what the reaction was all about and all along those lines. And in one of the swing states, the Pennsylvania lawmaker had reached a $47.6 billion budget deal with sweeping changes to public education. So they're going to make some changes in public education. And in the conversation I was having yesterday with some different folks, I think I've had this with 2 or 3 people, including one of the people connected with our network. South Carolina is apparently, which is just down from us, going to be banning, or they're trying to put together a proposal to not allow the kids to have cell phones. So apparently they are putting this into effect for 2025, 2026. So, like I said, there are a number of things that we can talk about, including the population drive and all along those lines. But maybe we'll start off with that before we get to some of the other hard-hitting news. So I guess I'll start with you, Shaquille, because I don't know how y'all handle cell phone restrictions and rules in other in Australia and down under and everything. But what is your thoughts? Because this is something that will be quite interesting. Because I know that there have been incidences, like even when some of the schools have been hit by terrorists or hit by folks that are causing evil on schools, that having those phones has been quite handy, because that's how the police learned about the incidences. I could probably say that that might have helped even in Columbine and a number of other places as well. But apparently in South Carolina, they're trying to put together an initiative that will not allow the kids to have and I want to say it was any personal computer. So it was like, iPads, definitely cell phones, and I'm not sure what the rule will be on laptops, but they were definitely saying that they wanted to get rid of these items that I know a lot of kids, like I said, I don't have any of my own, but my two nephews definitely both have cell phones. And if they had to go to school without their cell phone, I'm not sure how my brother Malik would feel about that, because that's how he keeps in touch with them sometimes. So how do they handle that in Australia? Shaquille?
I mean, Mark, if the question is, do I think that teenagers and young people should reduce their usage of cell phones? Look, I certainly would advocate for that around the family dinner table. At school, yes, it can be it can be distracting, but if you're going to throw Columbine into that conversation, and whether cell phone footage in an event like that was useful, then yes, of course it was. So whatever issues I may have with kids being distracted by cell phones is absolutely trumped by the value that we got out of kids at Columbine and other school tragedies, being able to live broadcast that footage. So I'm not really sure how to respond to that. With the greatest respect, I think I'll hand it to you know what? I won't even hand it to Dan and Sasha, because I think the wisdom of Jacoby would probably be the most appropriate.
Jacoby is a parent himself, and he just popped in, and maybe he doesn't know what I was talking about. But one of the stories that I saw,
well, I'm sure that if you repeat the question the way that you asked it to me, I'm sure that Jacoby would probably be the best person, given his experience in the IT space. He would be the best person to respond to it.
Jacoby, just really quickly, what I was asking about is I saw a news story, and I did mention Columbine because I do know that cell phones were part of what happened in there. But one of the news stories I saw last night was this notion that the people south of us in South Carolina are looking at putting a proposal to actually ban cell phones from the students. So, I mean, no student in South Carolina, if this actually passes, would be allowed to have a cell phone. So I just wanted your take on that, because this is something that is going on in South Carolina, where they're saying that they're going to not allow the students to have cell phones whatsoever. So any take on that, Jacoby?
I mean, you have on one hand the safety concern of a lot of parents, which Shaq expressed dealing with the whole Columbine situation. And a lot of parents have that safety concern or are afraid of taking away that cell phone due to the amount of, gun violence and school shootings that happen in the area. If it goes on, then they won't be able to contact their child. Or if there's an injury, their child won't be able to contact their parents. So you have a lot of that goes on even now. So, for example, I hate using personal anecdotes as an example, but I'll use a personal anecdote as we're going through that transition currently at the moment. For example, one of the high schools that we're going to next year, the teachers are divided. Normally, schools will have a universal rule on, hey, you can't have cell phones or you can have cell phones. In the school that we're going to next year, it's teacher based or classroom based. So some of the teachers will allow kids to have cell phones. Some will not, because cell phones truly are a distraction and they do cause a lot of problems, especially with social media. They've done all the studies on that, talking about depression and how so on and so forth. There's so many avenues that keep these kids distracted as they're in class. In that same high school, those teachers that have already said that, hey, if you have your cell phone, if you fall behind because of your cell phone, I am not answering your question, so you get left behind. So in a sense, that's the way that those teachers in that school are deciding to handle that. In terms of what South Carolina is doing, again, I would be more so for it and just trying to put more, I guess, avenues and ways for kids to, if there is an emergency, fire, shooting, which is sad, we got to say shooting, but fire, shooting, so on and so forth. There are more avenues and more safety precautions for kids to be able to contact and get in to communicate with their parents if there's some type of problem. Because yes, cell phones are definitely a distraction in school. I even find myself even in here when we're trying to do homework and trying to study stuff. If there's a buzz or what they call the phantom buzz, and I think everybody understands what the phantom buzz is. If that phone is outside of your pocket, but you still think that there's a ring that happens in your pocket, so you pat your pocket because you think it's there, or you have your phone in your hand and you think you get a message. That happens with kids already. And my daughter goes through that. And some other parents that I talk to in different parent groups go through that same thing. So it becomes a distraction. So it's understandable to help increase grades.
Yeah.
May I ask a question after Sasha goes, please?
Yes, Sasha.
My question is this to everybody. It's a world edition, and you spending 20-some minutes to discuss gun control. Are you an expert in the field? Do you know so much about it? Can you influence the decision about gun control? No, and no, then why are you wasting
Well,
everybody's
first of all,
time?
Sasha, first off, two things. One, I do have folks that are in the law enforcement community that are in my family, so maybe they're listening, maybe they got some thoughts, and maybe they'll even
So
get
bring
into
them to
it.
the
But
show.
hold on a second.
Bring them to the
And
show.
first off, there was not 20 minutes because I spent about 12 minutes on the opening of various news stories, including some world stories. Matter of fact, I started with
Well, there
world.
are some
But then,
important world stories, and you just heard about and now gun control. Who
we
cares
talked about
about gun
guns, and
control when you cannot
but
influence it?
Sasha,
You
we
cannot do
talked about guns.
anything about it. Come
You
on,
don't
now.
know what I know about it, so
Yeah,
So,
Sasha,
so let me
we talked about guns.
let me jump in. Let me jump in. I'll respond to Sasha. I'll respond to Sasha, and then I'm going to ask the question I had for Jacoby.
Yes.
So Sasha, my generation, I'm slightly younger than you. My generation grew up with video games, and we had access to guns in those video games. So we are experts, which is why we need to talk about it. Jacoby, my question to you is: you made the statement earlier that, part of what you said a lot of things, but at one point in your monologue, you said something on the lines of young people's grades. You know, if their grades have suffered because of the use of cell phones, then that's on them, and it shouldn't be the teacher's responsibility. I'm just wondering if that was going to be, if what you've suggested there was going to be the policy, how would the education system be able to assess that? How would they be able to assess, like, this student's grades are bad because they didn't learn the material and they weren't keeping up, and this other student's grades were bad because they were using their cell phone? How would that work in the statement and proposition that you made?
I mean, it would be just in terms of trying to figure out if the removal of cell phones helps the grades, it's the normal study situation. So you track the progress of the students if they improve, then yes, the cell phones were an issue or were a hamper to that situation. So it's just like any other study that they do. I mean, you have your control group. You already have the study where You already have this. You have some studies where, okay, you have your control group where, okay, these individuals were utilizing cell phones and it did not affect them. You have the other group where, okay, well, we took away the cell phone. It's just like any scientific method that they use to study anything, really. And
Well, maybe they use that same sort of methodology to suggest that people of color in the United States that have been living there for generations don't perform as well as people of the same ethnicity that are recent immigrants to the United States. And you seem to take quite a lot of exception to me saying that. Isn't that the same scientific method that you're proposing should be used with cell phones?
I disagree because
I know you do. That's why I'm asking you.
I'm trying to explain that. So I disagree. The reasons why I disagree with that methodology that you're talking about is that methodology leaves out context of the whole situation. There's never a one size fits all situation to anything that we discuss on here. One thing affects another thing. It's like a giant ball of yarn. I hate to use the Forrest Gump analogy, but yes, life is like a giant ball of yarn. Everything connects. So when we talk about the methodologies around the recent immigrants, say recent immigrants from Africa versus the African Americans that live here already. The recent immigrants don't have the histrionics or the context dealing with redlining, dealing with the war on drugs, dealing with all the history that is there that is already told these African American individuals that they cannot succeed and they will not succeed. So if we ignore that and say, okay, well, we're going to take these two individuals. These two are both black. One's coming from out of the country and one's not. Well, it just doesn't fit into that nutshell. You cannot place place things in a vacuum to prove a point, and that's the problem that we run into.
Well, I'm surprised to hear you say that because.
Can I finish my point real quick?
Yeah, well, if it's going to be real quick, yeah.
So we cannot place things in a vacuum to grab particular statistics that fit our argument or our narrative. That is not the way scientific method or the scientific study or even looking at society works. So that begins a disingenuous argument, and that creates a problem within our society. And that's honestly where a lot of the rift is when we try and discuss these things, is that we forget about the context that creates a lot of issues. And if we could add in that context and understand the histrionics and understand that there are particular things that cause groups of people, even though they have the same melanin in their skin.
Can I respond now? Because you're sort of repeating the same thing now. Can I respond?
Shaq, I let you finish even though you
Okay, so the answer is no. Okay, fair enough. Please keep going. Please. No. I apologize. Please keep going. Please keep repeating it, please.
So when we look at two people of the same color or the same group, it's the same thing with Hispanic individuals that were natively born in the U.S. and immigrants that come in that have a lower crime rate. So these things, we have to understand the context a little bit more than the scientific, hey, this is it.
You had a question, Shaquille, but then I'm going to pivot to what I had brought up.
Thank you. Sorry, I wasn't sure if you wanted to repeat it a third time. So based on what you've just said about things being in a vacuum, You've previously made a statement that we should assess things based on kids without cell phones versus kids with cell phones and see what the differences are. But yet, when we talk about people of color succeeding and Africans who come to America succeeding, you don't want to look at that in a vacuum because you've got to put things into historical context. I find that really fascinating. As I have said over the last 4 or 5 years I've been coming on this show, much of the things that your community advocates for hurts other minority communities. And we used to say that Sasha was our Russian on this show. 4 or 5 years ago, we used to always refer to Sasha as a Russian, okay? Or we used to refer to him as a Soviet. Since the war broke out, we've made a distinction. Now, I was one of the very few people that used to always say he's not Russian, he's Ukrainian, well before that war used to break out. Please, Sasha, if I'm saying something that's not true, please correct me. I'm one of those people that that recognized that difference. You Americans didn't. Okay, so when you start trying to compare one thing for another thing, I don't think that makes any sense. Again, well, I've used this example before. Sasha has been so gracious to offer to tutor me, and I'm sure that there's a part of him that in his heart, there's a part of him that's probably disappointed that I've said that I don't have the time, Sasha. I'm sorry. I'm being honest with him because I don't have the time. I don't want to waste his time and his efforts, but I'm sure that he would love to see me excel. Same thing with other prominent chess players that come onto our network who have offered the same thing. Okay, but you know what? Sasha doesn't look anything like me. I've met his family. I sometimes talk to his family members. They don't look anything like me because, hey, they're Ukrainian and they're not Indian. We get along really well. And I can't imagine saying anything more insulting to Sasha, but to say to Sasha after these years of not taking him up on his offer to coach me in chess, that, you know what, Sasha, I am going to be coached in chess, but I'm not going to be coached by you because you don't look like me. I need to have somebody that looks like me. I can't imagine how that would go down. Now, before you respond, Toby, Dan Worthington's been here for 32 minutes. We're into the show. I'd like to give him an opportunity to express his views.
Okay, if Dan wanted to express that.
Okay, so if the issue is cell phones and kids, I think the issue with regarding cell phones and kids, I've actually taught in high schools and other places where cell phones were there. Put the cell phones away unless you need to use it to look something up that we're talking about that's relevant. I think it's important to have those communications devices available for parents for security reasons, but put them away. Don't play games. Don't waste your time. Don't be non-productive in the classroom.
Can we mute ourselves if we're not talking because there's a lot of background noise?
I don't know. Anyway, I think that's my position on that with respect to being able to do comparative analysis and statistics. Statistics is a science. Certainly, there are a lot of factors that affect statistical analysis. A bare statistic that compares the performance of people from other nations that come into the United States with current residents of any race is a valid statistic. Jacoby wants to color that, pardon the pun, with histrionics. And yes, histrionics does affect it, somewhat, but only for making excuses, only for creating, reasons why the comparison isn't valid. If comparison is a comparison, the statistic is the statistic. It speaks for itself. But there's a lot of that going on in our country today. Democrats do it, Republicans do it. Statistics can be bent to prove a point, no matter what the point is, because it depends on who's doing the study, where the numbers come. We've seen a lot of studies from the past that have turned out to be total frauds. With respect to gender and all this other stuff. There's a lot of fraudulent research that was done. There's a lot of fraudulent research done with respect to sexual weirdness and all that in this past. People have debunked those studies because they were done by perverts to begin with. They went in with a bias. See, bias also affects statistical results in your analysis of statistical results. And so, and there are implicit biases and there are explicit biases. You've probably taken a statistics class or two. I have. I know probably everybody on this show has. And so statistics is a science, but it's subjective with respect to the factors that are included in the analysis. So I guess what I'm doing is kind of splitting the argument in half and saying that, it really, really depends. Shaq makes good points. Jacoby makes some interesting points as well. I'm not going to get in the middle of it.
Yeah, that makes
But,
sense.
but when we talk about
Just
statistics
respond real
and we
quick.
talk
Just
about
respond.
logic
Shaq,
and
Shaq, let me
mathematical
respond real
results
quick.
and science, no, I jumped in
You
first.
said I could jump
Um,
in right after
so
Dan.
when we
Okay,
talk about, do you not feel like you have enough time dominating the show and talking over other people, Jacoby?
I was asked to respond after Dan, and now you want to
Yeah,
talk.
and I've jumped
Oh,
in.
I didn't
Is
ask.
that
I
okay?
didn't ask. I'm staying out of it. Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to compliment Dan on what he was saying.
Okay, great. But I'm trying to say something. Is it that much of a big deal for me to just say something which I would have already finished?
Again, I thought I was responding after Dan because that's what we had just agreed on. But okay, go Shaq.
Well, when do we agree to that?
Shaq, go Shaq. Just talk.
Are you sure? Okay. Well, thank you for your permission.
What?
Dan, I think that when we look at statistics and what is scientific proof and all the rest of it, we can often apply a very sterile mathematical thing to things. And if I can just use another chess example, if you'll indulge me. Sasha and his wife is a substantially better chess player than I'm probably ever likely to be. I'm sure that I have the talent to become as good as they are. They certainly tell me I do, but I'm not sure that I'll ever put the time in. Okay. I play a particular open, which is my favorite open. And when I go on his chess show, I talk about the open. I play an open called the King's Gambit. Now, statistically speaking, that's a really bad open, right? It's dangerous for me and it's dangerous for the opponent. Okay. So against really good players, I take all these risks, I sacrifice my pieces, and my game collapses. Okay. So on statistics, you shouldn't play it. But in reality, I do really well with that. In fact, I even beat Sasha. He said that on his own chess show. He's like, Shaq just got one over on me. Okay. No, okay. We played like 30 games. I bet he once. That doesn't mean I'm a very good chess player, right? But I happened to pull a bit of a stunt, and he actually played my open because I said, "Oh, don't deny it to me. Give me the open." So I did. And so he did. Okay. But mathematically and scientifically speaking, my open is not a good one. It's really good at club level, right? I can beat most club champions and most states in countries not as big as the United States. I'm going to beat those club champions and state champions because I'm really aggressive and I play moves that they're not expecting and they don't know how to respond to. But statistically speaking, what I'm doing is not the right way of doing things. So I think
that's your style.
Exactly,
right?
That's my style. And I think that when we try to put things into like mathematics and science and whatever, who's to say that the opens that are being used by the grandmasters of today, the best player in the world or the best 5 players in the world today, are going to be the opens that are played in 50 years from now?
Yeah, we don't know.
We don't know.
Just really quickly, because I did say I was going to pivot really quickly because we spent a lot of time on this, and I did. Have
sorry, Jacoby's waving his hand in the background because he wants to go next. So you better let your friend go next.
Shaq, the moderator is talking.
Yeah, I was getting to pivot and everything because
hey, I was on your side, Jacoby. You still got upset. Wow.
Hold on, one of the other videos that I watched, it was very interesting. And I'll give it was a couple of years ago and everything, but it's still relevant to what's going on now. Because there's been this conversation, me and you, Shaquille, have had as well, that some of the people that are very much into state rights now, and that's part of the reason of what happened with Dobbs and a number of other cases, have said that they don't want the federal government to put out these rules. They would prefer the states to be in control. So like each state would make its decision on abortion and everything. But I had not thought about it. And there are some people that are affiliated with this network. They can either say what they are about if they're listening and everything or not and everything. But the Lovins case was also one that was state ruled, which is around the interracial relationships and all along those lines. So if I'm hearing the argument correctly, and this was Representative Braun, I think is out of Indiana and everything, he was apparently misrepresented in what he was said and everything. But there were some questions that he was asked as to whether that rule would then go into things like interracial relationships and Brown versus Board of Education and other things. And he kind of
if what
flatly
you're
answered everything. So my question is,
No.
should those rules be applied to not just Dobbs and abortion? Because this is an issue that could come up even in the 2020 election. But should it also
Okay.
be that each state it decides whether it wants to
okay,
interracial relationships?
So if what you want me to do, if what you're trying to entice me to do is to attack the conservative position that Dan holds, right? I'm happy to do that, and Dan and I can have a bit of a back and forth, because I think that would be an interesting conversation. And Dan knows, and I know, that him and I don't 100% agree on some of these issues. I'm happy to do that. But before we move on to the next subject, out of respect for Titovi, he was waving and wailing his hands around, wanting to respond to the last topic. Let's let him have a response. Not interested?
Okay,
Good.
so
There's
let's
the
move
first.
on to the
There's
next
the
thing. So Mark, I see the abortion ruling as being a narrow exception, in that the court believed that that it is a states' rights issue, that they have to decide what the rules are around. There isn't that. And even in Roe, I mean, if you go back and read Roe and the opinion in Roe and the dissenting opinions, concurring opinions, and all that, it was based on a flimsy argument to begin with. It was based on this idea promoted by Justice Douglas of a penumbra of the Constitution. There were no fundamental rights directly at bear there, and so the court is saying, we got Roe wrong. We've gone down the road way all this time. Roe isn't workable. I think that ultimately in all the states we're going to end up in similar position to what Roe permitted. I don't think, except some states will be more what you call wacky, extreme, like California and other places. But I think we're going to end up in a very similar position in most states. That will have a mediating factor. I don't see any state having an absolute abortion ban. I don't think that'll hold up in the courts. We've seen that discussion already. Okay, so with respect to Brown v. Board and other cases like that, and the race-based marriage cases, we're dealing with fundamental rights. They're very clearly fundamental rights, and the court's not going to go down that road to attack fundamental rights and make it a states' rights issue. That is a federal issue. It's clearly a constitutional issue, because the analysis from a constitutional perspective is strict scrutiny with respect to rights that are considered fundamental, right? So we're not going to see the court go down there. I doubt that they'll even attack the gay marriage issue, because they've made the determination that marriage is a fundamental right and that kind of thing. So there is no comparison between the abortion situation from an analysis, constitutional analysis, and other fear-mongering positions that the left would like to see people worry about in the election. From a constitutional perspective, there's no comparison. From an analytical perspective, at least from a constitutional perspective. I've written a lot on this subject. I know a lot about it. So I think there's going to be accommodating and mediating positions that will roll out of this. I think most, especially since Trump's taken the position that he is, I think we're going to see this become not a fear issue in the future. I just think common sense will prevail ultimately.
What's your thoughts?
So I'll say that I morally oppose some, not all, but some abortions that some of the abortion legislation. But I have always said that I think that legally that it should be allowed, and I've expressed some concern about the restrictions on abortion that are being proposed. Now, yes, I do believe it should be a state issue. I think that people like Lindsey Graham really let down the Republicans when the Republicans said we want to leave this to the states, and then he immediately, within a couple of weeks, proposed that there should be federal bans on the issue. If you either leave it to the states because that's what you believe, or you don't. Don't sort of do a bait and switch. Abortion, if we're talking about that specific issue, abortion in the United States under Roe was actually more permissive than the abortion rules in Europe and in Australia and New Zealand and Canada. So the idea that abortion restrictions in the US were somehow, designed to oppress women just doesn't bear out when the left is constantly talking about Europe as being the great socialist haven for feminism and racial rights. It just doesn't make sense. I think people are picking and choosing what they want. In relation to the race issues that Dan talked about, I think that people would be much better served to just get on with it. No matter how much of a victim that you think you are, just get on with it. And I know Jacoby's sitting there pulling his face. I'll just mention that in the arguments that we had backstage last night, Jacoby made the statement that I hate him. And I said to him, don't ever say that I hate somebody. I have never used the word hate towards somebody. And I said to him, you have no idea the sort of abuse I went through in my life. I said, would you like to see some of the scars that I got when I was a child? And as I started to take my shirt off to show him some, he told me to get stuffed and left. So again, you people on the progressive side that claim to be the exclusive arbiters of, hope and the exclusive arbiters of the victims of the world will not ever accept that other people have had equally dreadful experiences. Now, Sasha Starr, I won't go into his history. He's welcome to share that with you. But most people don't voluntarily choose to leave their home to set up somewhere else for no reason. They either go because the conditions in their own home are terrible, or because they feel like they've got better opportunities somewhere else. So for people who are born in the United States to rail hard against people that have moved internationally in search of a better life and then call the rest of us intolerant, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't hold any value. And just as a continuation from last night's comments by one of our viewers, okay, if you want to call me, more so than Dan or Adam, me an elite, and my family an elite, my family aren't elite. My families are nurses and doctors, the majority of them, okay? They've worked very hard to get where they are. I've gotten very lucky because God's bestowed upon me some skills that I can use to trade the markets, all right? Am I supposed to apologize for that? I'm a little tired of people on the left railing against and bullying those people who have made a success out of their lives. Am I supposed to be a failure? Would that make me better in the eyes of the left? Does that give me some credit in the eyes of the left? Because you're the underdog and everybody, cheers for you until you become successful. And then once you're successful, you're hated. How ridiculous is that? The fact of the matter is that more people... Right? Exactly. And the fact of the matter is that more people have managed to get success in Western countries, especially the Five Eyes countries, the United States, Canada, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand, than they have in any other countries in the world, including the beautiful Western countries of Europe. So I think that should be just taken into consideration by the very insular American left that feel that they are the only victims, or they are the only people that have ever experienced any level of
First, Shaquille, first off,
deprivation.
you're making an assumption about the left because I know that even in my
No, I'm not. No, I'm not
self-proclaimed
making.
state,
No, I'm not making. I'm
no,
not
you're
making an
saying that
assumption.
it's insular, and I know
I'm
a
not
number of
making.
people
I'm not making an
a number of
assumption.
people on the left that have just as many ties as you do to international communities. I mean, one of my good friends,
Mark,
who kind of lost touch,
I'm not.
is in
Mark, sorry.
Birmingham, in Senegal, if I remember correctly.
I'm not making an assumption. I never said that they don't have the same sort of ties, but they act as though they have exclusivity over this issue. And so for people that say to me that I'm too far right, I'm not. I'm a liberal. That's why I don't agree with people like Dan or Adam on a whole range of different issues, but we're still friends. Okay? I'm a liberal. I have much more liberal positions than they've got. But let me tell you something. I have absolutely every ability to be able to discuss the disagreements that I have with their political philosophies without being treated like I'm some subhuman piece of scum.
Well,
That is not my experience with progressives. Progressives treat me like shit, and I have some objection to that.
like I said, that's your opinion, and I don't think that I treat you that way. I don't know that many others have treated you that way, including Solomon when he was here and everything. So we can argue that. But one of the questions that I had brought up.
I won't talk about Solomon behind his back. Bring him on the show.
One of the other questions that I brought up, we only got a few more minutes, but one of the other questions that I had brought up earlier, and I don't know people's opinions about this, is what I originally had asked was, is there any danger? Because that's what some people, and you would say that that's what the progressives are saying, is they're concerned that, and even Dan kind of brought it up, is you will hear some people say that if you go after abortions being a state rights issue, that those, and I can even say that my dad, should he ever decide to marry his longtime girlfriend, would be an interracial couple. Would they need to fear that it would then need to be that maybe North Carolina approves of it based on the Lovins case and Virginia doesn't, and maybe dad's got to move to Virginia because his longtime girlfriend is a white Jewish woman.
That's not a fair comparison to either abortion or to the gay marriage debate. Okay.
Yeah, as I said,
in the cases of interracial marriage and other civil rights issues, what you had was amendments to your constitution, or what you had was broad-based agreement on those issues. What you've had in relation to the Dobbs decision or is it Oberfield, Dan, for gay marriage? Is it the Oberfield decision? Is that correct? I'm going off memory now. When it comes to the gay marriage decision, if this really was an issue that was important to everybody, why would you relegate the decision to the judiciary? It should have been legislated. The right place for this to have happened is not in the judicial branch or even in the executive. This should have happened in the legislative branch of government, and they should have. I believe that gay marriage should be legal. That's my personal view. Dan doesn't agree with me on that based on our previous conversation that we had for an hour on one of our previous shows. Okay, what he thinks should happen versus what I think should happen are a little bit different, but that's besides the point. If this is a position the majority of Americans believe in and agree with, then that should be done through the legislature. If it is a position that majority of Americans don't agree with, then that should also be reflected in the legislature. What shouldn't happen is that Dan represents one side, I represent another side, we go to the Supreme Court, and 5 of the 9 people make a decision that's going to affect the whole country. That is a mockery of what your system is supposed to be. And quite frankly, I think the founding fathers would be appalled in the way that the system
worked
has
for
been
the
built.
left for a long
We've got a
time.
few more minutes
Zach.
to go and everything. Jacoby was waving his hands, and he actually has people in that community.
But Jacoby was waving his hands, and I invited him to say something, and he sat there and smiled and shook his head. So
the other topic and everything, but he does have folks that are in that LGBT community as well as being part
so do all of us. So do all of us. He's not an expert because he knows people in that community. Dan knows people in that community. Sasha knows people in that community. I know people in that community. That's not a qualification.
Are they directly family?
But okay. Well, if we're going to hand it to Toby, we'll all sit back. Dan, sit back. Sasha, sit back. This will go for a bit.
Well, no, we've only got about 5 minutes to go, and I'm hoping Jacoby will be quick. So, Jacoby.
Just a
Open
cool
way.
thing, chat. Let's stop the ad hominems. I have yet to do that to you, yet your whole conversation, you're 7
what
plus
you did
minute
yesterday was
Let's please stop
disgusting
that.
and appalling.
Can
What
I
you did
let you
yesterday
go
was
for
disgusting
7
and
minutes and
appalling.
didn't interrupt? I let you go for
Good,
7 minutes and didn't interrupt. So
good.
please allow me the
What
same respect.
you did yesterday
Please allow me
in
the
our
same
backstage
respect.
conversation
Please
was
allow me
appalling,
the
and you
same
should be
respect.
ashamed of
Please
yourself.
allow me the same respect. Thank
No,
you. So
no.
what I would like to say on just the abortion topic, for example, the abortion topic should always be left up to a woman and her doctor. It should be a medical decision because we are under some assumption that, well, those who tend to want to establish anti-abortion laws and all these other things tend to have this feeling that women are flippantly choosing to have an abortion or using it as a form of birth control. That is usually the argument, the predominant argument in that community, which is untrue. It forgets that a woman comes to this decision in a very tough decision because they want to have a child, but yet they should, if they're in a position where that child is unviable, then they have to have that abortion to help, because without that medical procedure, they themselves could die or they themselves could never have children anymore. So
I don't think anybody disagrees with that one.
That family planning position should be left up to that family and not for everyone else.
That's already the law under Dom.
I just talk.
I know, but
you.
Finish.
Can I talk? You two just went on for 10, 20 minutes. I didn't say a word, yet you're interjecting every time. And then your first complaint to me is you keep over talking people.
I gotta go. Hey, see you later, guys.
Please,
I'll see you then.
Allow me that respect. Thank you.
Why? You don't show any respect to anybody else, Toby.
I literally just pointed out over and over, I let you talk. And now you're complaining I don't let you talk.
Because you are once again mischaracterizing the position that the right has.
Please stop. I am answering the question. I haven't said anything about you but interrupting. That's it. So please allow me the same respect. Thank you. So in that abortion debate, that is where it usually hinges, because a lot of on one side talks about, well, hey, it's a use of birth control. It's flippant. It's a religious thing. The other side is trying to explain and say, hey, look, this isn't that. We just need the ability if we come into that problem, because nobody truly wants to have an abortion. No soul.
Hey, Sasha, because I don't have time to reply to your text.
Can I
you know
talk?
that he's going to keep going, so you may as well go to your next show.
Jack, please stop.
Yeah, I'm just letting Sasha know that he can go. I'm just letting Sasha know that he can go because I don't have time to respond to his text. So Sasha, yes, you're absolutely correct. He'll take the rest of the time of the show. So let him go. If you want to go to your next show, you might as well. I'll hang back with him.
Doing this than even just having a discussion. So getting back to the abortion thing, this is why I believe that it should be a woman's choice in that family planning, the way that they do it. And if just to touch on way back when I could not speak or I did not speak and I just shook my head because I wanted to move the topic since we're going to the close. When we spoke earlier about using the histrionics and statistics and all the scientific data, you talked about Sasha being Ukrainian and the history there and the history that he had. That history was important for Sasha, which we cannot negate the history that's important for the African Americans that live in the U.S., which you want to negate when you're trying to drop in the two individuals into a vacuum. Hence the reason you cannot do that, because there's so much history there. And when you do that, it becomes a disingenuous argument. So the history that a lot of African Americans deal with,
you do it to my community.
Themselves with
but you do it to my community, right?
Let me finish. The kids that have the PTSD that they're talking about, that they're doing studies, it's because the history they have on the history that those children are growing up in. So yes, the abortion debate, again, I feel it's the women's debate, women's decision. And in terms of the other stuff, it's the history, depending on what we're studying, the history can be very important to what that history is. Shaq, you can have the rest of the time. I'm leaving. Bye.
Oh, thank you for the last 2 seconds. We're at the hour right now. Thank you very much, Howard.